Welcome to the DAYL's August CLE, From Good to Greatness, Ways to be a Better Associate. Thank you for joining us. A few housekeeping matters before we begin. First, the CLE number will be shared in the chat towards the end of today's CLE. Please look for it. And second, the raise hand feature will not work. When you have questions, please place them in the Q&A feature, and I will do my best to have the panelists address them. Now I'd like to move on to today's presentation. I'm excited to introduce an amazing group of panelists that all are young partners and senior associates that can provide best practices on how to become an even better associate and prepare for you to take on your next role. First, we have Ashton Barano-Butcher. Ashton is a partner at Akin Gump. She represents private equity and strategic clients through mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance, and other general corporate matters. Ashton is in her 9th year of practice, graduating from Southern Methodist University in 2014. Next, we have Danny Napier. Danny is mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and real asset transactions partner at Kirkland & Ellis. He focuses his practice on complex transactions within the energy sector. Danny is in his 8th year of practice, graduating from Washington & Lee in 2015. We also have Dennis Sia-Latte. Dennis is a shareholder at Munch Hart. He is a corporate litigator representing clients in state and federal courts throughout Texas and across the country. Dennis is in his 11th year of practice, graduating from the University of Houston in 2012. Then we have Paige Tackett. Paige is a senior associate at Zell. She represents global insurance carriers and matters involving first-party property insurance coverage disputes and bad faith litigation in both federal and state courts. Paige is in her 11th year of practice, graduating from the University of Missouri at Kansas City in 2012. Each one of these panelists has so many accolades that to list them all would take too long to discuss in this short hour. But each one of these panelists has one common theme, that those you talk to around this community will say that these panelists were phenomenal young associates, like many of us in this Zoom room. And therefore, without further ado, I'd like to ask Ashton our first question. Ashton, where do you see young associates make mistakes most often?
Yeah, happy to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashton Barano-Butcher. I think the place that I see mistakes most often coming from junior associates has to do with communication. Communication is probably, if not the most, it's one of the most important skills in this career. And you sort of almost have to pretend that if you have not told someone something that they don't know. Things as simple as when an email comes to you from a senior associate or from a partner asking you to do something, you need to respond and say you're going to do it. I know I made that mistake when I was a junior associate. I wouldn't necessarily communicate that I was on it. I would just start working on it. And I got the feedback pretty quickly that to them, it feels like it just goes into a black box unless you communicate directly that you are working on it. So I think that that's really the biggest thing, is just be in constant communication and be as detailed as you can in those communications.
Dennis, do you have anything to add about how young associates make mistakes most often?
Sure. And again, thanks for having us on this panel. I think one of the biggest things that a young associate can own and is your attention to detail. In our litigation practice, I think where I see the biggest mistakes, because it hinders your first impression to a partner, is attention to detail. Spell check, making sure that a brief that you turn in is checked to make sure that you don't have spelling mistakes in there. Make sure it's well organized. Your citations are in place. If they're going to be exhibits, have them put together and ready for the partner to look at. I think your attention to detail takes a little bit off of the partner's plate, and it's sort of the first step to gaining a little bit of trust that really ends up going a long way to making sure that you start to grow a relationship that will, in the end, make you the go-to associate for that partner. So I think that's what I would really push on, is what is your attention to detail? How trustworthy are you on the little things?
Paige, how do you see young associates make mistakes most often?
Sure. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made as a young lawyer, and I've seen in other young associates, is shying away from opportunities that seem intimidating because you've never done them before, like taking a depo, arguing a hearing, taking the first draft of a big summary judgment motion. The only way to learn how to do those things is to do those things. And so don't hesitate to jump in and ask for those opportunities to do those things, because that's how you learn how to be a great lawyer.
And Danny, what about you? What do you see associates make mistakes most often?
I think one of the points maybe that hasn't been covered that's important is it kind of goes past making an individual mistake, but it's not learning from that mistake so that you don't make that same mistake again. I mean, so the advice I would give is, you know, we all make mistakes, right? And if you come across something, it's, you know, it's okay. And we'll talk about, you know, how to get ahead of it and find solutions, but it's also important, and it's on you and it's on us to come up with, you know, strategies to ensure that we don't make that mistake again. And that can be anything from changing, you know, something about the way that you keep your emails or your documents organized, to the way that you keep your tasks organized, to, you know, just digging in on a particular legal issue that you didn't know at first. There's lots of ways, but it's important that you dig in to try to not make the same mistake more than once.
Now that we've talked a little bit about making mistakes often, where do you see associates make the biggest mistakes, Dennis?
So I think as associates, what you'll first start to get from your firm are individual isolated assignments, you know, draft this or research this topic. And I think where I see associates make mistakes is they think only about that isolated assignment, whereas that assignment is part of a bigger case strategy. And where an associate can really set themselves apart, and where associates don't do that, is trying to engage on the case at large, trying to engage in the entire case strategy. One, it really will inform you on how to better accomplish this task that you've been given. But when you take that discrete task and you're able to convey to a partner that you understand how that puzzle will fit in the entire case strategy, because you didn't just look at that assignment and that you're really engaged in the case at large, one, it helps make your assignment more of an integral piece to be fit into the whole puzzle. And two, you'll find that the partner is going to see you more as an asset and probably give you more assignments, which is what you need as an associate to meet your billable hours, or really just to get more experience. But then you'll start to see yourself become seen as a part of the team, and then you'll probably just get adopted into the case staff. It's one of the things that associates can really kind of do to set themselves apart is look at assignments more as a broad part of a case strategy rather than just your discrete assignment, because sometimes that's how you will show a partner that you care more about the case than that one discrete assignment.
And Paige, where do you see young associates make the biggest mistakes?
For me and for other associates, it's taking on too much work and saying yes to way too many things, and having too full of a plate, because there's only one of you. There are only 24 hours in a day. And if you have so much work on your plate that you get overwhelmed, things just start to fall off the plate. And so learning the art of saying no, thank you, I'm too busy to take this on right now, I think is a really important skill, and it will help you just keep your head above water and avoid making those mistakes where things slip through the cracks.
Danny, what do you see as the biggest mistakes?
I think, I mean, a lot of the big ones have been captured. I guess the only other point I would make here is a little bit more of a maybe try to smooth some concern over. But I mean, just to be clear, you know, like I said, everybody makes mistakes. Like, the goal is not to be perfect. Anyone who thinks they're perfect has an imperfect grasp of reality. The goal is to get better and better and better at avoiding mistakes or solving mistakes. And you know, those are kind of what some of the other panelists here have discussed, but I just want to reiterate that it's not that anyone here hasn't made a mistake, right? So don't get too wrapped up and down on yourself that you think you're not going to be a successful attorney because you know, you've done something that we've probably all done. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm actually reminded of a really important one. Beware of the autocorrect or the auto type feature in your Outlook box. It will add in the wrong recipients for emails. That's a mistake I have done. So just flagging that one
Many
because I wrote it
times,
down
right?
afterwards.
Yeah.
be very careful, and if you can, turn on that that notification that says if it's sending to external people, and check who it's going to. That last one.
Great advice.
Ashton, what are the biggest mistakes that you see?
Yeah, I think that an environment where you're most likely to make your most costly or most material mistakes is if you, as a junior associate, like go rogue and don't ask the questions that you need to ask, and end up in email chains or on phone calls or drafting documents that don't have oversight from more senior attorneys. Which again, I think it comes from a place of it's very easy as a junior associate to be scared to ask questions. You don't want to look stupid, or you don't want to feel like you're retreading the same water, or maybe you think, hey, I'm a few years into practice, I should know this by now, I'm embarrassed to ask. But that's where you get into scenarios where you can make a truly material mistake. And so it's always better just to ask the question.
So Paige, we've talked a lot about making mistakes. How best can a young associate help fix or approach a mistake?
Sure, just kind of picking up where Danny left off, I think it's really important to remind yourself that you're human. You're going to make mistakes. And I am a type A perfectionist. I'm a firstborn. My nickname growing up was Perfect Paige. I've worked through that in counseling. It's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves to do things right. But one of the biggest pieces of advice I got from the first partner I ever worked with is it's called the practice of law for a reason, because we're all practicing our entire careers. We're never going to master it. And so just keeping that in mind and giving yourself some grace, I think is really important when you do make those mistakes. And for me, when I make a mistake, I ask myself 2 questions immediately. Did I know better? And have I made this mistake before? And if the answer is no to both of those questions, I let it go, I learn from it, and I move on. I don't carry it with me. So that would be one of my biggest pieces of advice.
And Danny, how would you recommend that an associate help fix or approach a mistake?
Yeah. So I apologize. I don't know if this has necessarily been hit yet, but I mean, one of the most important things is to raise it right to the people that you're working with. I at least in transactional work, it's very much the case that, if a mistake has come up, it's most likely going to come out at some point, and it is much better that it come from you. And like we've all been saying, we've all been there. So, but more than just raising it, the best approach is to bring it to the right people, whether that's a senior associate, or whether that's a partner on your transaction, or whomever is sort of the next line of communication or line of defense, if it's smoothing something over with a client or the opposing side or whatever it is, and also coming with a proposed solution, right? The hey, there's a problem is received much better if, hey, there's a problem, but this is my path forward on how we can resolve the problem or fix the issue or whatever it is. And you may not be right. I mean, that, again, that happens too, but now you've brought in other people to help come up with a game plan, because also true, like, your mistake, everyone's mistakes affect everyone. It affects the impression of the firm. It affects the impression of the deal team. So these are group activities in a sense. So make sure you're looping in the right folks to come up with the right game plan.
So Dennis, how can a young associate quickly demonstrate his or her value when assigned a new matter?
I think it really starts from the intake process, right? If you're sitting in front of a partner and he or she's describing a case and giving you the background, showing that initial engagement, having your notebook out, or your laptop out, taking notes, really writing everything down. And then that initial engagement where that should be the point where you ask all the questions that you have. There's a real sense sometimes, and I remember that I probably had it when I was a younger associate, that if I ask a question, it shows I don't know what I'm talking about. If we're talking about a subject matter that I'm not familiar with, if I just say, what even is that about? Can you give me a little bit more information about that subject? That I've shown that I'm not smart. And sitting on this side of the table, when I don't get questions like that, when I can tell there's a little bit of a question mark on your head, it concerns me, because then you're going to go away and this assignment's going to take a lot longer because you don't have the background, because you didn't want to ask me. And so I try to volunteer it, but there should be a confidence in you to ask those questions, because that's the only way you'll turn around a product that can be really trusted. And so it starts at the beginning, being engaged in the intake process, asking questions. So you want this, you want that, so this law is applicable, but not that. We want all those questions at the beginning, and that's how you show at the beginning that, okay, you understand what we're asking you to do. And when you go away, you're going to come back with a product that better aligns with our vision when we assigned the task.
And Ashton, how would you recommend that an associate quickly demonstrate his or her value when assigned a new matter?
Sure. So I think something that was definitely preached to me when I was a junior associate, that now even more so I see the value, is taking ownership of the project. And I think a lot of times when you're a junior associate, you are given maybe these one-off assignments, or you might not see the whole big picture. You're turning comments to a purchase agreement, and it can be frustrating to feel like, you know, maybe you're not getting the kind of work you want to see, or you don't see where it fits in the big picture. But to be completely honest, anything that you do as a junior associate and that you ask the questions and do correctly moves the ball forward on the assignment, moves the ball forward on the transaction. And so looking for opportunities to move the ball forward, to progress the deal, is incredibly important. If an email comes in and someone needs to do something with it, and you think you could be the person to do the thing, tell the group, hey, I'm planning to do XYZ thing in response to this email. That gives me an opportunity just to say, yes, please do that. And then if I'm tied up in phone calls or something else and I can't get to it, I know that that's still moving forward, and it's not kind of just stuck in limbo while I'm, off doing other things. So really that's the biggest thing to me, is just keep things moving, look for opportunities to jump in and help. And that's also a great way to learn as quickly as possible.
And Danny, how would you add to this conversation about making a young associate quickly demonstrate his or her value when assigned a new matter?
Yeah, my views are similar to what Ashton just hit. I mean, the proactivity element is huge, and it comes with, time to really understand exactly where and how you can be proactive. I mean, a couple more just examples, at least in transactional world in my practice, we are pretty much always running a matter off of a checklist. And the better that you can become at being the person who regularly updates the checklist based on, the day's events and emails and document exchanges, and sending it to the group, even if it's just a, FYI updated checklist from today, actually looking at it and seeing, okay, what things are coming down, what documents are in our court that no one's talked about drafting. It's a great opportunity to volunteer, to get some drafting experience and offer to draft something, even if it's something that you might be a little uncomfortable with. If you offer that early enough, you might actually have enough time to really wrestle with it and get better. And it also, lets others on your team know, okay, at least somebody's looking at that, so we don't have to think about that one as closely right now. Those are just a couple other ways, to Ashton's point as well.
Yeah, I'll add on to what Danny said. I'm a huge checklist person, and, to the point of being obsessive about it. And if I go into NetDocs and I see that the checklist hasn't been updated at all for a week, everything has timestamps. We can see that. And it's always a little heartbreaking to me whenever I see it hasn't been updated. Whereas if I can log in to NetDocs, I see that it's been kept up. I know that I can trust the associate to know what's going on in the deal. They're monitoring all the email activity and reading all the emails, and they're helping me and helping the senior associate or mid-level associate keep track of where everything is, which is incredibly valuable.
Paige, what about for you? What can a young associate do to demonstrate his or her value when assigned a new matter?
Sure thing. So I have two things. One, make sure you're getting everything done on time. First and foremost, whether you're in transactional law or you're a litigator, we all live and die by deadlines. Everything's urgent. And so for you as a young associate to not only understand that sense of urgency, but also, respond to it and be on top of what you're doing, and getting something to a partner when the partner tells you they need it is extremely important. If a partner or a senior associate is emailing you, hey, where are you on this? You are not doing your job as a young associate. And for me, that is the most important thing. When I ask for something by a certain date, that's when I expect it, because I need it, because I, as a senior associate, have to answer to a partner. The partner has to answer to their client. And so there's a reason why you're being asked to do something by a certain deadline. And so you need to make it. And if you can't, emergencies happen, you need to email the partner or the senior associate immediately and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's where I am on this project. Here's still what needs to be done. And here's when I can get it to you. Just over communicate that to the partner. So that's number one. And number two is speak up. You are getting paid to think and to analyze and to understand the issues going on in your case. And you need to share them. I know as a young lawyer, I often just kind of sat in the room quietly, like, oh, the partners know this way better than I do. There's nothing I can contribute here. I'm just here to listen. No, that's not true at all. Oftentimes in those meetings being like, I'd be correcting the partner in their head, like, that's not the issue in this case, or this isn't the right witness, or, things like that. The associates are the ones who are the nitty gritty of the case. They're doing the doc review, they're drafting the discovery, they're prepping for depots, they're doing all of that. So speak up and share your ideas, share potential pitfalls you see, share, summary judgment strategies, whatever. We definitely want you to contribute to the team.
Okay, Danny, how do you recommend a young associate manage workload?
So this one's tough, right? I mean, this is one of the hardest things to do really at any stage, right? Time management, workload management is difficult. And obviously, as a lot of you know, particularly when you're first starting out and you don't really know what to expect. There are a lot of different ways, and I wouldn't necessarily say some are better than others. I guess some are, but I guess step one, recognize. I mean, it's almost never going to be a perfect balance, and once you can kind of accept that, I'd say it's a little bit easier to work with. Again, particularly in transactional matters, it's a lot of peaks and valleys, right? And when you're in the highs, you kind of just have to dig in, and we talked about deadlines already, and communication, and all of those things still ring true. But it's also true when you're in a valley, there are some things you probably should be doing to ensure that you're not the only one who's slow, right? But it's also acceptable to take some time for yourself and plug back into your exercise routine or whatever it is. I know some others will hit on some of those points. One big tip I would throw out is, it's valued for eager associates, right, who want to take on new work and new projects, and we appreciate that. It's on you to manage that workload, and a tool to do that. I know it's hard to say no, or feel like maybe you're not even allowed to say no at a junior level. And I guess what I would stress is, there are ways to kind of sidestep work in an appropriate way, meaning, if you have a lot going on and someone comes to you with an urgent task, it's perfectly acceptable to say, thanks for the opportunity. I would love to help you with this. Here are the 4 or 5 things that I have to do in the next 3 days that, these other partners, that these are also ASAP items. Do you think that this is something that I could accomplish after that list? Or is this something that needs to get done right away? And that kind of puts a little bit of the helping you prioritize and back on the person who's asking you. And at that point, we kind of have to make the judgment, okay, I actually do need this, in 36 hours. And I need to find someone who actually has that capacity and can maybe push some other things on their list. So that's one example. There are probably people more senior than you, mid-level associates, senior associates, who have other techniques, depending on the partner, who can help you kind of figure out what's the right situation to even be trying to sidestep some requests that are for completely new matters. Sorry, one other point, if you're on a case or if you're on a transaction, it's also true that that transaction is yours. It is your deal teams. And so in a certain sense, the things that come in, they have to be allocated somewhere, and sometimes you might have to step up and put in some work. But by the same token, it's important that you have you plug in on a good deal dynamic, because just as a hypothetical, if you've got someone who can, help cover you, like if you're, you have, anniversary plans with your spouse or something like that for the weekend. I mean, it's okay to try to align coverage with people who can help you. And the better you can strike that balance with the rest of your team, the more, if you're willing to plug in for other people, they'll be more willing to plug in for you. And those are just some other, I'd say, examples of ways to kind of help manage and strategize as things are moving quickly.
Paige, how do you recommend a young associate manage workload?
Sure. Something just popped in my brain with what Danny just said. Like, if you have an anniversary, speak up, find the workload. I think one of the perks of being a Texas lawyer is you get to work with good, kind people. We're not in New York. We're not in Chicago. This isn't cutthroat. Most partners and senior associates you're working for, understand you're human, and they respect that you're a human being. And I very rarely ever had a partner get flustered with me if something's come up, there's a vacation I have planned or something like that. You're a person, and we all know that. So take a breather and knowing that. For me, managing workload, I've been at jobs with all different kinds of hours. I've billed 1,900 consistently at one job. A job I had for a few years, I was billing 2,300 a year, and that was insane. Don't recommend it. But for me, managing workload starts with taking care of my physical and mental health, because what we do is really hard. It's also really fun, but it can take a toll if you're not taking care of yourself. One of my favorite phrases is, you can't pour from an empty cup. And I truly believe that. And I try to make sure I fill my cup. And so I do that in a couple of ways. One, I schedule a vacation every single year. I take time off. I've taken a week vacation. I've taken a 2-week vacation, but I make sure that I have things on my calendar that I can look forward to make, knowing that I'm working this hard for something that mentally just kind of gives me a goal and a reason to keep going. And then the other thing I do is I do things outside of work. One of the biggest lessons I learned during the pandemic was, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a person who works in the law. And those are two different things, like different mindsets. And that truly changed my life. And so that I think it's important for you to get outside of the work bubble and do things that make you happy, and be with people who understand you and support you and can help recharge you. And I think that's one of the biggest perks for me. And honestly, the best thing that's ever happened to me in my career here in Dallas is being part of the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers and volunteering and meeting people and having a community of friends. And at this point now, they're like family, to just be myself with and vent with and have a drink with or volunteer with. And just those relationships are really sustaining because they understand, they can empathize with you, and they can help keep you afloat, because it's really hard. You can get underwater really quickly in this career. And so it's important to have a group of people that you can spend time with who can keep you sane. So those would be my two things.
Dennis, how would you recommend a young associate manage workload?
I think it's a great point, Paige. I know I remember early on in my career, one of the things that I do outside of the law is I play music. And I remember someone I worked for early on in my career asking me, with an eye for trying to convince me to take that out of my life, that sounds like a bit of a hassle, isn't it? And I remember thinking in the conversation, what do you mean that's a hassle? That's the reason I can keep going, right? And so that person wasn't able to convince me to stop doing that, thank goodness, because it is what keeps me going, having that thing outside of your life that has nothing to do with what you do every day, has nothing to do with the deadlines that we face every day, is incredibly important for your mental well-being. And so I echo that statement that you made, Paige. It's you've got to find that, and you've got to fight to keep it. It's going to, this is, someone, I've heard it several times that the practice of law is a jealous mistress. It takes all your time. It wants all your time. You've got to fight to keep that thing with your family, your church life, your physical well-being, those things that are outside of the law. You've got to fight to keep those. Now, one practical point I had about how to manage your workload is you got to start an assignment immediately. You've got to start it immediately so you can fully grasp what's being asked of you. At your level of practice, and even at my level of practice, I still underestimate how long it will take me to do certain things. In fact, it's going to take you 2 to 3 times as long as you think. And so if you don't start early, you're going to find yourself up against a deadline, not having had enough time to get it done or to turn in a quality product. And all of it kind of snowballs. There's that real snowball effect that really associates who have struggled with management of time and management of work have felt when it all seems like it's coming down on you. And it goes back to, did you communicate well with your partner when you first got the assignment about your availability? Were you honest about your workload? Were you trying to be a superhero at that point and said, you know what, even though I can't see a minute of sleep in the next 3 days, I'm going to accept this assignment because I'm afraid to say no, I'm afraid to ask for an accommodation of some sort. And you add that on top of it. Because you've done that, you can't start on that assignment until you finish the one that was due 2 days ago that you're already late on. And now you find yourself, by the time you get to that assignment and it's due tomorrow morning, and you realize it would have taken a week to get that assignment done. There's all these things that everyone has said. It's you have to really plan out your life. Your life can no longer exist in things happening one after the other and you just taking them on as they come. Everything really has to be planned out. If you're not the organizational type, you've got to find solutions to that, because that is what's going to help your work life go well. And then it's going to help your personal life and your mental health stay intact. Without that, you can't do a good job at work. If you're not mentally in a good place, if you're not physically in a good place, if your health is in jeopardy, you can't do a good job at work. And that's really going to start that snowball effect. And you're really not going to feel that you've picked a career that you can do for the next 30 years, which is what we all want from the people that we work with, right? We want that feeling that, okay, I've made the right choice and I can do this for a long time and I can actually manage this. When it's overwhelming like that, you cannot. And so those are all little things you can do to make sure that you don't get in that state where you feel like, I can't do this anymore.
And Ashton, how do you recommend a young associate manage workload?
Sure. Since we're sort of on the mental health train, I'll just plug a couple of things. I feel like, what everyone has said has been excellent, so I don't really have anything to add on top of that beyond. On those bad mental health days, it can be difficult to even come up with your own resources or do your own research to figure out, okay, how can I get myself out of this hole? How can I get the help I need? So there are resources available to you as a young attorney here in Texas. Specifically, the Texas Young Lawyers Association has an attorney wellness hub on our website. There's also TLAP, the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. Both of those websites with the resources kind of compiled and available to you come up if you just Google Texas Attorney Wellness. So if you reach one of those days where maybe you haven't listened to all of this sage advice and, you kind of find yourself in a tough spot, all you have to do is a quick Google search. There's a lot available to you. I think that there is a huge push at the state bar level, local affiliates level to make sure that wellness is prioritized. And on that note, don't hesitate to reach out to your friends as well. I think that everyone in my entire career has been more than willing to be a listening ear, help me. I think that what Paige said is correct, that in Texas, we are very lucky to work with overwhelmingly a very, welcoming, great group of folks. And so, don't hesitate to reach out for help. On a less exciting note, I would say maintaining checklists of things that you personally need to do is also very important to maintain your workload and stay on top of it. And don't be scared to try out multiple things. I have done a variety of different ways of managing my workload in that way. I started out writing, I would have a single page of a notebook for each different discrete client matter where I had just the tasks for that matter. I've done the same thing just in draft emails that I save in my draft emails. Right now I'm using Evernote. I've in my 9 years of practice have tried, probably 10 different ways of keeping track of things. And so if you try something and it doesn't work for you, try the next thing. Everyone's unique. And so you can find ways that work for you to stay on top of what you need to be doing and anticipate what comes next.
Oh, if I may add to that point, Ashton, I think it's a phenomenal point because we think about making massive to-do lists, big whiteboards of your entire week or your entire month, so we can look ahead to deadlines that are coming up. But sometimes I really just need to focus my mind for the next hour. And so I'll grab a Post-it note and then bring whatever it is on the board down and make a micro, to-do list that sits in front of me so I can really focus for the next hour. Just be flexible with yourself to get yourself to the point where you can kind of get your work done in an orderly fashion and kind of keep your mind from getting really bogged down. So just following up on that point.
Yeah, I actually do that exact same thing. I do the Post-it thing.
Yeah, it's sitting here. I've been writing things down because I got in the next 2 hours. There are things that I really just need to get done, and it has to be right in front of me.
This really is the key for me. I have a color coded calendar, so everything as a litigator. So like if motions are due, and that's blue. If I have hearings are blue, motions are red. Deadlines are red. Yellow is personal. Orange, I put times when I'm going to work out on my calendar, because if it's not on my calendar, that's the easiest thing for me to be like, I just will skip the gym because I've really got to finish this research project. So I am a psycho about my calendar. Everything's on there and everything's color coded. And every single Sunday I go and look at the week. And is there a lot of red? Do I have a lot of deadlines? Do I have hearings this week? And it really helps, just the visual helps me get organized on Sunday nights and figure out what I need to do and how I need to prioritize to get done. And that gives me so much calm and like sense of control over my week. Because of those, organizational skills that I'm using ahead of time. It makes all the difference in the world for me as far as starting Monday on a good note.
Ashton, what are the best ways to manage expectations with partners or clients?
I'll keep this one pretty brief. I think just one major piece of advice on this is, as has been reiterated a few times on this call, timeliness of assignments is extremely important. And again, one thing that I remember not understanding when I was a junior associate is kind of how to make sure that I knew when stuff was due. It sort of felt like if you weren't told, then it's just always an ASAP assignment. So, if you can think about it as your job as the junior associate, that if you're not given a deadline, ask for one, propose one, come up with something, because, on one side of things, it's really easy to have a whole list of things that are due ASAP and you don't understand specifically, like, I need this thing by 6 p.m. today, and you miss that deadline. But on the other side of things, it's also very easy if something doesn't really have a, near deadline, to procrastinate, put it at the bottom of your list, and it keeps falling down the list every day. And then before you know it, 2 weeks have passed, you barely remember what the instructions were, and you don't want to have to go back to the partner. So, always best to take that on yourself, to just ask for the deadline.
Danny, what about you? What do you think are the best ways to manage expectations with partners or clients?
I think a few things that haven't been said that are probably more noticeable in the junior stages are, I think I'm self-aware enough to recognize that I have a handful of like formatting or other document drafting idiosyncrasies that I like to see. I don't think personally, I don't think that I necessarily judge or hold that over someone, but maybe others will tell me otherwise, but regardless, most people have them, right? Most partners have them. The longer you're there, the more you'll start to see who cares more and how they react. But the point is, a lot of that stuff you can kind of get ahead of if you talk to if you're given an assignment from a partner, maybe you're not as familiar with, or a senior associate, it's perfectly fine. I do this all the time to talk to, or I used to talk to people who have worked with that person a lot more and say, hey, I just got given this assignment. I know you've worked a lot with this person. Do they have any, issues that they always focus on in this kind of an assignment, or, any weird formatting things that they're going to write that I need to change everything, in this document to get rid of Oxford commas? I don't get that, but everyone's got some, and some people care more than others, and it's perfectly fine to ask people who are more familiar with those partners what they might care about. And kind of a transition and similar topic, some clients have things too. They're not usually from the drafting perspective, but some clients have been burned in prior cases or prior transactions on a particular issue that they've then become hyper focused on, and you may not have as much experience with that client. And so again, it's perfectly acceptable to ask whomever is assigning you with a project to say, does this client focus on a particular set of issues more than maybe we would in a vacuum, or more than another client might? And those are kind of proactive ways you can then address those in your first attempt, instead of trying to clean up after you're pointed in another direction.
Dennis, what attribute or skill do you value most in working with a young associate?
So I'm a commercial litigator. When I assign a research project and I get it back and I get your synopsis of the issue, I want to see in there that you looked at the first case, you looked at why that case is important, you went back and looked at cases that informed the decision that was made in that case, right? You went back enough to make sure that the synopsis that you gave me, that you trusted well enough so that I can look at it. And if I need to make one change or another, that's about it that I need to make. It all boils down to trust, right? Because in our position, we're juggling a number of cases, and we've assigned you a portion of it. We want you to own that portion of it and come back to us to give us a product that we can just plug into the puzzle that we're trying to solve. And so you show that trust by looking up that rule. If there's a rule that applies, that governs the case, and you don't really understand it, I need you to look it up. You've got to kind of do the hard work. It's the hard work that really differentiates you, right? If you're not willing to do the hard work, the hard thinking, right? What frustrates me the most is when I get the sense you recognized that doing that extra step was going to take some tough thinking. We're going to have to put some time into reading and analyzing a series of cases or a series of statutes, and you skipped it because it was hard. That doesn't give me the trust that I need, because then I may end up, it tells me I may end up in front of a judge one day in a courtroom relying upon work that you've done. And I find myself, behind the eight ball because you've skipped a step there. Or it tells me that when I get work from you, I have to take the extra step to make sure you did go that extra mile. It's all about trust and reliability. And that's the number one attribute. Associates that I've worked with that I have found to be the guys that I just want to keep calling, or the ladies I want to keep calling to do work with me, that's what I found is that, okay, I understand if I give her this, she's going to bring back a product that she's thought of really well. And even if there's a mistake in it, it's well thought out. It wasn't happenstance, and it certainly wasn't a shortcut. And that's what I really look for.
Paige, what attribute or skill do you value most in working with a young associate?
Sure. Number one is work ethic. If I say jump, are you going to say how high? Are you going to get it done, early, or is it going to be consistent? Is your work product going to be consistent? I think for me, that's what set me apart as a young associate, and why I got so much more work from partners is I was willing to work however long it took to get something done and get it to the client when they wanted it. And partners really respect that. Sorry if anyone here is from Harvard, but Harvard grad might be the smartest person in the room and have the greatest ideas and strategy, but if they can't get it done, they're worthless to me. What I need is somebody who's going to come and grind and learn how I like to do things. That's my number one.
What about you, Danny? What attribute or skill do you find most valuable when working with a young associate?
Different than what's been said, because I actually do think those are the most important. The only other one I'll add to the list that I also value is actually a point you talked about earlier, but just on the proactive side, you know, if you can find ways to get involved in work streams that need to be done and that make my life easier without having to be asked to do it, that's hugely valuable. I mean, that's a way to build trust among other things. It kind of goes into some of the other points.
And Ashton, how about you? What attribute or skill do you find most valuable in working with a young associate?
Honestly, I think that they've really hit the nail on the head. Everything that's been said is really the top stuff. I think maybe just one quick note. It's always fun to work with people who are eager to learn. It's beneficial to you because then you get a chance to learn and grow your career and grow your practice, but it's also beneficial to us because, I mean, frankly, teaching is incredibly important, and also you learning makes our lives easier in the end. And so, you know, showing up and being eager to actually learn the stuff, not just kind of go through the motions, is also very important.
Danny, how can young associates best manage different people's personalities in the firm?
This is a good question. The first thing I would say that I guess everyone may have, you know, better or worse understandings and appreciations for, but we have to remember you're a professional in a professional environment, right? We all are. And, you know, I remember being a summer associate and, you know, having 80-year-old partners walking around, and I just wanted to call them, you know, Mr. or Mrs. Smith. And it was just, someone told me, don't do that. It was such a weird reality shock for me to realize that I was now a professional colleague of these people, and they're not like, you know, my great uncle or something. So the recognizing that you're a professional is really important. And that what comes with that is I mean, part of life is dealing with difficult personalities, right? Certainly part of this job when you usually have someone on the other side of a representation, but also internally. And, you know, the bigger your organization, the easier it might be to, you know, more or less just kind of stay away from people that maybe you just don't get along with. That's not always true. That's not always easy. And particularly, you know, the smaller that your organization is, or your team, you know, your practice group, it's possible that, you know, you might have two potential sources of work coming in a small practice group. And if one of those is someone that you just can't find a way to work with, or, you know, creating a particularly toxic environment, part of being a professional requires evaluating whether that's the right environment for you. I know that's kind of a hard thing to process and think through, and I'm not saying if you're, you know, have a bad day, you should necessarily leave, but that's part of an internal evaluation that you have to have. But I think that's really important just to kind of keep in mind is in a lot of ways, you know, we have to find ways to work with each other on a practical level. And from personal experience, one thing that used to happen to me is I would get these emails from a particular person that I thought were really micromanagey and kind of frustrating, mostly because this person was telling me to do things I was like in process of doing, and they'd waited 4 minutes. They would have seen that email go out. And it just started to really bother me to the point that I didn't like working with this person. And before I just immediately cut that tie, I started just calling the person at the end of every day to catch up on, there's opportunities I had to learn from this person. And I was reminded in those phone calls that they were actually really nice and really wanted me to do well. They were just a little bit of a micromanager, but it was easier after establishing a routine of building that interpersonal relationship to then not read their emails with just such a kind of a pestering tone that I had developed because I didn't have a personal relationship with that person. So from a practical, you know, advice, maybe try to lean in a little bit and really see if it's a barrier that you just can't cross.
Ashton, what about you? How can young associates best manage different personalities in the firm?
Sure. I think, to me, I feel like my practice and the way that I practice law is very empathy driven. And, people like to think about lawyers as being, professional arguers and whatever. But I find that having empathy actually is a very strong tool to have in the practice of law. Not because it makes you soft or anything like that, but because being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and think about why they might be the way they are can be extremely useful, not just with partners and more senior associates and other people that you kind of are working with within your firm, but opposing counsel, your clients. There have been hundreds probably of situations in the last 9 years where things happen or people say things a certain way, and it's very easy to take it personally or to think that it's an attack, or to even if it is an attack, to really just take it to heart and feel, have that ruin your entire day. Or ruin your relationship with that person. But if you can try to sort of put yourself in their shoes and understand, okay, maybe, the partner got upset about something because they are feeling this same pressure from the client to perform or to get the purchase agreement right or something like that. They are feeling that pressure too. And people are not the best at managing their own emotions sometimes. And so maybe that just filtered down to you. And so then, it's kind of like Danny said, if you can figure out a way to put yourself in that mindset of, hey, this person's not intending to pester me, they're not intending to be mean, or, kind of just putting yourself in their shoes and understanding where they're coming from. I think that practicing empathy is a great way to start to improve the relationships that you have and to understand other people and how best to work with them.
And Paige, what do you think about how to manage different people's personalities in the firm for a young associate?
Sure. We talked about this a little bit when we were preparing, but I do think it is worth mentioning. This is like real life, and like any other environment you are in, there are going to be people you like and there are going to be people you don't like, and vice versa. There are going to be people who don't like you. And that is working, just being a professional in general, no matter where you are. It's not just specific to law. And that's okay. It's okay not to like everybody. And I'll be totally candid. There have been partners at every single firm that I've worked at that there's been a partner I haven't been fond of and I haven't wanted to work with. And there are really easy ways to get around that. What I did is I found a partner who I really liked, who had a lot of work to give. And I just kept asking that partner for more and more work. So when the partner I didn't like reached out, I could say, I'm so sorry, I've got all of this work with this partner right now. When I come up for air, I'll let you know. And then I never came up for air because my plate was so full with this partner's work, right? So there are graceful ways around that. The other thing I would say that is super important is just stay out of it. Stay out of firm drama, stay out of firm politics. You want to be known there for your professional skills. And that's it, right? You don't want to be known as meddling or being a pot stirrer, or you just don't want to be known as that in your work environment. And so just remember that, and always find something kind to say about somebody. There are partners I don't like, but I respect their work product and they're brilliant. And, they have a really great book of business and they work really hard. There's always something positive I look for to be able to say about somebody I might not jive with their personality.
Dennis, with law firms allowing people to work from home or the office, how much face time should a young associate have in the office and spend doing things around the firm?
I think you just got to be aware of your firm's policy, right? And one, don't abuse that policy. It's on you to make sure you're following firm policy, and it just makes no sense for you to do that. But the second way you've got to think about it is if we're talking about this with an eye for progressing and becoming a partner at your firm or becoming someone who the firm values, I think the way you've got to think about becoming a partner is the firm has indicated that it considers you to be part of its future, and that you are someone that is exhibiting the culture or supporting the culture that it wants at the firm long term. How do you do that? By being fully engaged at the firm. And so you do that by showing up and being present in the office, showing up and being present at office functions, being a contributor to various aspects of the firm, committees, social events, all of that. Your presence there is an indication to the firm that you're interested in being part of the culture and being part of the firm long term. And that will do a lot to get you to that point when the firm sits down to make a decision on who will be part of its future, that your name continues to be part of that conversation.
Ashton, how would you add to that?
I know we're kind of short on time, so I'll echo 100%. Just the more that you put into the firm, the more that the firm gives back to you. So, you know, do with that what you will. If you want to be super involved and be a superstar associate, you are much more likely to progress in your career and get the necessary support to continue to move up and be given opportunities.
So I know we're running short on time, but I want to get this last question out. I want to know if there's one piece of advice that you could give to young associates, or if there's one thing that you would know when starting your career over, what would it be? And I'll start with Paige.
Sure. I think if you take away one thing from today's webinar, it's communicate. And I think here, one of the biggest, most important lessons I think that I could have done a little bit better is communicate early on. I want to be partner. Like, I want to be partner at this firm. I want to work with you. How do I get to partnership? And just be a little bit more strategic about work with a partner that I like, to be strategic, come up with a plan on what things I need to do to get to where they are. And continue to come back to that with that partner or the group of partners at your firm, every single year. This is what I want. Here's what I've done this year. What do I need to do next step to get closer and closer to partner? Because partnership is something you climb to, but to make to the top, it's the partners that pull you up there, right? The partners are the ones who nominate you and vote for you. And so if you're communicating what you want, that you want to be part of one of them, and you want to do whatever it takes to get there, and then continue to work with them towards that, I think you're in a much better position than somebody who just keeps their head down for 10 years, works really hard, and then pops up and says, I'm ready to be partner now. I put in my 10 years and I work really hard, make me partner. That's not how it works. Yeah. It's very strategic. So, and start it early would be my piece of advice.
Sorry, Danny, what about you? You're on mute.
We almost made it the whole episode. Glad it was me. All right, so
Sherry's gonna come after you.
Sherry, I'm sorry. For me, it was probably two things. I wish I had earlier invested in my own long-term growth and learning. And what I mean by that is, when I first started, because you're drinking from a fire hose, was very task oriented and just getting this assignment done, addressing comments afterwards, moving on to the next assignment, et cetera. And yes, firms have formal processes to try to evaluate, but they're not always great processes. And what I started doing later in my career, I wish I started earlier, was just basically taking notes on anything and everything I had a question on from a transaction that I wanted to learn from, the senior associate or the partner afterwards. And so, what that looked like was, I would sit on calls where we'd be negotiating issues, and somebody would give the rationale for why we made a particular revision in a document, and I didn't understand it. So I'd write it down and ask later, why, what's the point? Should we always do this? Is it deal specific, et cetera? Some deals have their own unique issues, and if I didn't understand it, I would try to do some learning on my own. And then once I had my sort of list at the end of the transaction, I would reach out and say, hey, can I get, 15 minutes of your time? I just, got some personal edification questions. I'm hoping you can help me learn and get better. And people are generally really receptive to that. But a lot of times it was on me to actually make that happen. And then the last one, a shorter point, you all probably have heard that, a lot of the job is, in most jobs is who and networking is important, and it seems like it's not at a junior stage, and that's because the immediate effects aren't really felt usually. One thing I started doing more in the middle of my career, I wish I started earlier, was when you're working with clients, particularly at the junior level, there's usually a junior person that is on the client's team who also kind of feels the way you do, and started to build the relationship with that person in particular, so that you know, we kind of had each other to lean on from both perspectives, right, from the lawyer side and the client side. And also because then you kind of grow with that person. So when you're trying to make your case for partnership, you know, you can present, you know, your sort of your network, your list of individuals you think you might be able to get work from. And because you've invested in those relationships, even when it felt like to you it didn't really matter, it wasn't going anywhere.
Danny, I know that we're at time and everyone, and I want to hear Dennis and Ashton's comments, because this is, I think, a great question. And so I want to continue the CLE for an extra few minutes, but I want to remind everybody that the CLE number is in the chat. So before you leave, if you have to leave, because we are at time, I want to remind everybody who's attending today that they should check the chat for the CLE number. Dennis, I'd love to hear what you think is, if you're starting today, would be your one piece of advice.
Very, very quickly. And this goes to something Paige said, is that you find something good about someone that you have a difficult time working with. This is actually something I learned from someone that I was having a very difficult time working with. It's, you know, when you're in every sport, every art form, everything that you do, you're taught that fundamentals are incredibly important. You don't progress to become an expert at something if your fundamentals aren't in place. There's one thing I would remind myself of as a young associate, is that you've got to put in the effort to learn the fundamentals of your craft very early, because no matter where you go, you're not gonna be able to get away from it. When you become partner one day, you're gonna find yourself exposed because you did not learn those fundamentals early on. And I spent a lot of time doing that based on that advice. And I find that to be something that has served me well. So fundamentals. You're not going to be able to gloss over anyone not learning the basics of your craft early. The second thing that I would say is take care of yourself. It all works out. Just take care of yourself.
Ashton, I'd love to hear your...
Yeah, I'll just add also really quickly. Don't be an island. I feel like that was something I did really well within my firm. You know, I started working at Aiken. Obviously, it's a big firm. It has a lot of people, lots of associates. And so within my firm, I feel like I did a really great job of, you know, just knowing everybody, building real relationships, building real friendships. And so, you know, it was easy for me to do that while also completing all my tasks. And I felt like, okay, this is my complete life. I would say over the past few years, I've done a better job of reaching outside of my firm and getting involved in other organizations. You know, there's TYLA, there's DAYL, there's all kinds of sister bars, there's all sorts of things here in Dallas available to you. And I feel like it just has made my practice of law so much richer, because there's just a ton of amazing people out there that otherwise you never would meet. And it's just been a lot more fun being able to go to events and see people that I know and talk about people who have totally different practices, many of which we don't even do at my firm. And so I have no idea about them. So just, you know, reach out, meet people. Part of the joy of life and the joy of this career is that it is so people oriented, and, you know, you don't want to kind of just go through it on your own, because that's not a path to success.
Well, thank you guys for all of that insight. I want to thank all the panelists. I've learned so much from you guys today. I want to thank all the attendees that stayed with us for an extra 5 minutes. So I really appreciate that and your time. I want to also thank Sherry Harris for all the behind the scenes work that she does. And before we leave, I want to remind everyone, all the attendees again, to check the chat for the CLE number. Appreciate your time. I'll leave the window open another couple minutes for everyone to check the chat for the CLE number. But with that, I think we're adjourned.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.
Like,
Everyone.
Thank you.
thanks, Jerry.